Greetings, everyone. I'm Greg Archer, and welcome to the Esalen Interview, where we connect with change agents, swim deep waters, and wonder on the edge of it. Thank you for tuning in. It's a curious time in history. Our hearts and minds are being sent out to you. We just keep you in our thoughts. Thank you for showing up today. We have an amazing guest with us for the Esalen Interview. Joining us is Bart Weetjens, Belgian-born Zen priest and celebrated social entrepreneur. Cannot wait to talk to you, Bart. In 1995, Bart founded a popo which saves human lives from disaster and disease by training hero rats. And you heard that right, hero rats. And one of the things they do, in fact, is sniff out landmines. And I'm really wanting to engage in a conversation with you about that because I find that fascinating. Bart entered the fold at the Wellbeing Project in 2015 to help shift the culture in the field of social change to a more caring and compassionate one. Among other things, he is an Ashoka Fellow and a Schwab Fellow in the World Economic Forum. He won the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship in 2009 and firmly believes that inner well-being is a prerequisite to do sustainably well in society. And who can argue with that? So, Bart, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for asking me, Greg.
Absolutely. And happy day to you. And I'm asking everybody this during this curious time in history that we're in all together. How has this time been for you? You mentioned you're in Antwerp, Belgium at the moment, right? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So how has it been there? How has it been for you and your family?
It's been an intense time. Pretty intense because we're not used to be together, confined at home all together. And this gave amazing chemistries. Generally, I would say things were amplified, both the cozy, intimate moments, and also the conflicts were intensified. The four of us, so I have a wife and two daughters, we made the best of it. It has created new openings that we hadn't perceived yet in our family, in our way of being together, and also allowed us to recognize that we each individually need our own space for self-care. And that's a blessing. Lots of insights in this period. And in the same time, of course, Belgium is one of those countries which was heavily hit. It also depends on the way of counting, because in Belgium, every suspect who dies outside of the hospital is also counted as a COVID victim, which pushed up the numbers and pushed Belgium in the stats up to number one. It would be fair to say that we've been probably equally hit as the neighboring countries, France and Germany. But what I noticed was that since this was so present in the news, lots of people in my surrounding have struggled with anxiety, with too much stress and worries. And I feel it's not only in Belgium. I mean, these days we're connected via Zoom and other platforms worldwide. I see and hear a lot of embedded anxiety that people go through, depression, substance abuse, a lot of not so positive sides of us, of our human condition, that now express themselves in this crisis. And we're just at the beginning. I honestly think there will be need for a lot more care and support worldwide to all these communities who are affected by this.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely, in terms of mental health and support and having that connectivity to know that we're not alone in this, that is for sure. Another question that keeps being asked, and thank you for sharing, all that you shared, because I think many people can relate to being suddenly with their families and having a whole new dynamic being presented, right? What is one of the things you think this time is attempting to teach us?
Well, in the first place, I think it's teaching us about impermanence. No? I'm a Zen Buddhist priest, so for me the concept of sunyata, um, which basically has two aspects in it. One is the interdependence, the interconnectivity of everything that exists, and on the other side, also the impermanence of things. Um, we humans like to hold on to some stability, to something fixed, to a certainty. We Most of us spend a fair deal of our lives creating certainty. Working for our pension, for instance, is one of
Right.
those.
Yeah.
Having a certified job and things that we actually try to reach because we love certainty, we love safety, and safety is a basic need. But um, where it comes to the point where we see ourselves as something disconnected from reality and something substantial that that is ruling the world is, I think, we our biggest teaching that we have to learn now is that to see that it's actually completely the opposite, that we are so vulnerable and that we are completely interdependent with everything that is, and that we are fully part of the universe, and not in some way controlling the universe or so, but that we are fully, fully part of it.
Yeah. Do you think that we're gonna get that lesson? Like we're gonna like get it. We're gonna it's gonna sink in.
Mhm. I would hope so, and I wish so. I fear, on the contrary, that this is a temporary thing that people have been confronted with, but a large majority of us has difficulty of finding peace with that. And all of the things I talked about earlier, um, the discomfort, the dissatisfaction, and the anger, also the fear that lives within people during the confinement. Um, doesn't necessarily, it can be a start for learning this lesson, but it doesn't necessarily leads us there if we don't have sufficient support mechanisms. And there, and you also already mentioned it, the sense of community, of meaningful communities, is crucial. So many people started meditating during the COVID confinement. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. What do I do? I feel not in a good shape, I'm unsatisfied. Maybe this is something also for me. And I find it, first of all, fantastic to see, but in the same time, there's so many people who, through a path of meditation, of course, it reveals an awareness about ourselves. But in the same time, if we are too isolated and not able to connect in a meaningful way, in a vulnerable way to others, um, we risk to, well, that our meditations are and even especially the lessons we can learn, that we simply don't absorb them, that we don't integrate them, and that we stay on in a fighting spirit with reality rather than surrender to the reality, because there is no other way. We, if we cannot surrender, we cannot really learn.
Yeah, that's the thing, integrating the lesson or the lessons, right? And allowing that to really permeate throughout our being. I hear you. I really appreciate what you just said. That's woo, take that in, folks. Do you have a particular thought about what mindset might be helpful as we slowly begin to re-enter society?
Mhm.
Um, you seem to be you very peaceful, calm human. um,
Well, I am in the first place human, and I also have my moments, of course, and I fully embrace it. By the way, I think it's that capacity to embrace the full paramount of all these emotions, mental states, physical states, and so on, are part of what makes us um, so diverse and what makes us so unique. Um, so yes, I embrace even my anger. And I think even if when asking what, like what you just asked, like uh, the what I really think we can do is indeed embracing these things. As long as we are angry or frustrated with the situation, uh, we won't really advance. The first thing to do is to recognize, and we need awareness for that. We need an awareness, a presence in our body to recognize what is really living in us, rather than uh, bluntly fighting without even any consideration. And with fighting, I mean like putting it's the fault of the government, or it's this, or one particular group in the world is responsible for all these type of well, honestly, I'm going to label it ridiculous excuses. Uh, the way how to realize our human potential is first to recognize that all these things live in us, that we can be angry, and that it is normal to be frustrated, and that, well, a big part of our liberty is taken through circumstances. Um, so recognizing this is the very first step, I think, as a remedy to try to transform this. Um, and then next to recognizing it is accepting it, accepting that this is now the reality. This is my current reality. Um, and with accepting, I mean really welcoming it. Yeah, okay, I'm now in confinement. I cannot leave my house. I would love to go and see friends, but the only way I can do that is through Zoom, like we do here.
Hmm.
Um, this kind of acceptance of the situation, where we allow it in. We allow. We don't see it as something like put on us, but well, we allow this reality to live this reality. Um, and then a third step is I think investigate, inquire in ourselves, ask ourselves, what is it? We now have basically an outstanding opportunity to question ourselves. There's nothing else to do, right? Uh, so so what is it? Why am I angry? Because basically I have food, I have a roof over my head. What do I miss? And by investigating that, it also becomes clear what we have, what we can live, our experiences, which can be wonderful, and that it totally depends on our own attitude of mind, uh, and learning to be grateful for what is there. Um, and well, I often refer to somebody who is important to Esalen also. I saw on your website is Brother David,
Hmm.
who well, who identifies gratitude, gratefulness as the source of happiness, of joy, and this is personally for me a very important practice in this situation. Whenever I really don't see it, whenever I get upset with the situation, I try to again recognize this, accept it, inquire, and turn this around, transform this into, well, yeah, but see, and in the same time, while this anger and frustration is there, this is just one small part of me, and there is this big part of me which is so grateful to be healthy, to be cared for, to be loved, and yeah, and that is the source of a new mind, a fresh mind, a mind that yeah, that can be not identifying with that anger or that despair, that doesn't have to continue dwelling in the worries and in the stress around this, but a mind that can relax and be peaceful, grateful, and happy for what is.
Mm. Yeah, that's so rich. And I love how you speak about the mind. And, from my understanding, your mind and your mindset, even as a child, was one that was filled with love and peace, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, from my understanding, you kept rodents in your home as a child and made money from breeding those as pets. Is that true?
That's correct. Um, the latter part is correct. The first part, to say I had a youth filled with love and peace, is not necessarily true. I didn't have a very happy youth, I have to say. Um, and I was blessed with meeting on my path later on people who, with a lot of love and care, helped me overcome my trauma. Um, However, my love for rodents started when I received a hamster, a Syrian gold hamster, for my birthday. I called it Goldie, and
Goldie.
Goldie, yeah,
What birthday was it? How old were you?
I was 9 years old,
9 years
and
old. Okay.
and um, and Goldie was, well, I fed it, I overfed it. It was a fat golden Syrian hamster. And very nice hamster. It crawled. Well, I often played with it. It crawled in my sweater, under my arms, in my armpit. It was its favorite spot, probably because it's nice warm there.
Yeah.
And I um, I did a lecture on hamsters at school, and the hamster was discovered in my armpit, and I couldn't keep it there, and so coming home, I asked my mom if I could have a company for Goldie, and she agreed. She said, "Okay, fine, you can have a playmate for Goldie." And soon I had babies, and I couldn't keep the babies, so I brought them to the pet shop, and in the pet shop they gave me money for these hamsters, and then I thought, wow, business. Now I'm gonna breed hamster, because they had like a lot of offspring. And then I saw in the pet shop all kinds of other rodents, like there were mice and hamsters and rats and gerbils and a whole battery of different rodents. And I tried to breed them all and sell them to the pet shops. And I did that for like 4 or 5 years. Uh, when I was 14, I went to an intern school, and so I couldn't keep the hamsters anymore. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with them, and for me, I was like a lot smaller in size than most kids of my age at that time. Later on, I started growing fast, but um, I've often felt like, and also at home, I was the youngest of four boys, and we were kept in a rather strict regime, both my parents being teachers in Catholic schools. Um, there was a lot of not to do, and a lot of boundaries around our freedom. Really, too much, too many boundaries, really, um, and that isolated me. And through projecting my affection on these animals, just to come back to your question, I was capable of finding meaning in life and admiration for life, even in the shape of such a small, uh, well, lovely animal. Because most people don't like rodents so much, but I can become really lyric about rats. Yeah, so, yeah. So for me, it was a way of expressing my affection. Yes.
Yeah. So what was it about hamsters and rats that you found so intriguing? I mean, because that's a particular interest, right? I mean,
Hmm.
so what is it about them?
It was, well. First, I think this is circumstantial. I have an admiration for all life, but I think it was the only animal that my mother would allow
Okay.
me to have. So that in the first place, so I was limited to that. Um, but yeah, it's the admiration of life, the mystery of life, and it's even hard to express what this was in particular. Also, I have to say, when I left so I went when I was 14. I signed up for the military. Um, I became a royal cadet in Belgium, and after a year, I quit there and became the most pacifist person. But I think I had to go through that period in my life to realize that army was not my piece of cake. However, I completely forgot about my rodents. I I got into this military system, and yeah, and even after it, then I graduated again in the civil humanities, did maths, science, and then studied product design with a focus on appropriate technologies, because through well, many ways, through family that lived in Africa, I had like a strong connection with the African continent, and was aware about the big discrepancy in the big inequality, and the lack of opportunities there versus our seemingly endless opportunities. And I felt a certain calling to work and for these vulnerable communities of subsistence farmers in Africa. So after graduating from product design in Antwerp, in design school at Antwerp University, I focused on appropriate technologies and visited countries in Africa, in Congo, in Angola, Mozambique, where there was a landmine problem. And I saw to what extent these vulnerable subsistence farmers communities were dependent on uh, foreign foreign aid, on expensive know-how and goods to tackle that problem of landmines. These people would not be able to return to their villages because there would be a suspicion of landmines, and they would live for generations in refugee camps around the capitals, creating refugee camps is often was just plain slums, where they lived in miserable conditions without any perspective to lead a normal life developing their area. And I chose to work for these people. I felt that calling, and I I started actually with support from professors in design school. I started doing an analysis of the landmine problem, and soon I learned that the detection is the biggest issue. The detection of these devices is the most expensive, the most dangerous, the most tedious job, and the part of the whole mine action process that slows down incredibly. You have to know um, imagine you have like a soccer field that is suspected. Only less than 3% of that entire field will actually contain landmines. Nevertheless, the entire field needs to be um, scrutinized and investigated with all combination of different tools to make sure there is not a single mine left. And we call it the humanitarian standard. It's like 99.6%. It's also an interesting story how they got to this 99.6%. Is basically the US military who created a square mile in the Nevada desert, or I'm not sure it was Nevada, there's somewhere in the desert area in the US. They put 1,000 landmines of various types that are prevalent around the world. And then by all means available, cleared that entire square mile in the desert. And what happened was, so that is like airborne techniques, manual techniques, animals, dogs in the time, heavy machines, flails, and in the end they even scraped off like 2 feet of soil and sifted that to find all the mines. And they only found 996 mines back. So the humanitarian standard, 4 mines were never found back in this whole process. So the humanitarian standard is set at 99.6%.
99.6. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's how it came about.
So, so what you're talking about, you eventually you initiated the use of trained giant African poached rats, as an alternative to sustainable landmine detection. And so, how is that process? Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how is it training rats to do something like that?
Okay. Let's come to the second part of the question later. The first part is in early 90s. there was a worldwide call for new mine action technologies. The landmines came in the news starting 85, where Canada, Belgium, and France unilaterally uh, banned landmines. The production, the stockpile, transport, and deployment of landmines. And then later on, that resulted in the Ottawa Treaty and the worldwide ban and the international campaign to ban landmines. Now, because there was a growing awareness in society and mostly in engineering departments of universities and product design departments, somehow everywhere around the world there was some kind of research project going on for a novel technology in the realm of mine action. Could be manual techniques, mechanical techniques, better airborne platforms, multi-sensor platforms, robotics, and so on. And many of these things have resulted in other technologies that are used for a wide range of applications. But in mine action, the real only technology that made it accredited in the field were the hero rats. And how did I think of these hero rats is like, I think what was fundamentally different between my approach and the approach of all these and really like renowned universities and all these engineering departments there is they looked at it purely technically. While myself, I put myself in the situation of these subsistence farmers who lived in slums. And I was wondering, what would these people have at hand to tackle that problem more independently? Maybe a bit of a naive thought, because in the end, mine action is highly technical. It is, it's really specialized. It's dangerous, um, and but the success is really there because I looked at it from the viewpoint of the end user rather than looking at it from a desk in a university and combining technology and see where we can innovate. The innovation really came informed by the situation. I asked myself, what do these people have at hand? And in these villages, they really don't have a lot of material stuff. They do have a lot of natural resources. And it was when I came across an article of scientists from New York, actually, who had trained gerbils in a lab setup. They had proven a principle that these animals, with through electrical brain stimulation, that means with electrodes inserted in the pleasure center of the brain, not a very sustainable approach, that they could actually discriminate the scent of explosives. And that gave me an aha moment. I remember it very well. It was in Edinburgh around a single malt whiskey in a bar. Reading that article, I knew I was going to train rats. Not in this way with the electrical brain stimulation, but in a positive behavioral reinforcement mode. So in a sustainable mode, respectful for the animal. I also didn't know what kind of rats I would train, because there's, in the kingdom of mammals, more than 40% of all mammal species are some kind of rodent. They diversified all over the planet in the most unlikely shapes, from a small mouse the size of my little pink nail, or little fingernail, to the size of a capybara, which is like a large size of a large dog, or a small calf in the Amazonian forest. Rodents are largely underappreciated. They have, we know rats, of course. Rats have a very bad reputation because of the plague in the Middle Ages. Yet, rats have always lived in symbiosis with humans. They've always cleaned up our mess. And even if they carry diseases, obviously, because they live in the gutter and they live in our waste, they are actually very tidy, organized animals. It's amazing if you see
Fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, rats are a really fascinating species. But I can become lyric, and maybe that's not the subject of our talk.
Well, no, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to me because, as a young person, you were interested in rodents, and then here you are, you're an adult, and somehow this all came full circle. it's very curious, right? Um, so it's fascinating that they were able to detect these mines, but I also find it fascinating too. There's early detection for pulmonary tuberculosis in vulnerable populations is in Africa. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have three labs in one in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, one in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and one in Maputo, Mozambique, where on a daily basis. Uh, and by the way, we're at the moment repurposing these labs for COVID testing because we have PCR equipment there. So, uh, and also the people who live with TB are often also people living with HIV, around 60% of them. And these groups are also the most vulnerable to contract COVID. So, I mean, basically, it strongly holds together. At least that's the evidence we have so far. There's no yet a peer-reviewed scientific article about this, but the need is urgent, and Apopo is a humanitarian organization, so that's what we do. Um, we developed detection rats technology, so rats can discriminate very fast at a high accuracy um, any scent, given that it is comes in big numbers of samples. So, like for instance, tuberculosis application is a grateful one because around every 100 samples, you will have some 5 to 15 or 20 that will be TB positive.
Hmm.
So, and these samples basically people come to the hospital and they produce a sputum sample. And the sputum sample is then investigated under a light microscope. What we do is well, and this test with the microscope is basically you can as well throw up a coin. It's like 50% reliable, varying from 30 to 7%. What we do is we collect all these samples from all the hospitals around a capital city. Then uh, we neutralize these samples and then put them in an array in a setup where a rat sniffs out sample by sample, and that goes very fast. By doing that with multiple rats, generally with 3 rats, we can increase the detection rates up to 40%. That's what we've been doing continuously since we started in
Wow.
deploying them. Well, from 2002 to 2009, there was like mainly research and development, and then we got in an operational research phase where, well, we found it our duty, and that's also what we did it for. You know, to be able to save those patients and get them in early treatment, because the earlier you diagnose and the earlier you can treat, the more chances these people have to survive. And and I'm really proud to say by now 15,000 people um, who were initially missed by microscopes have been found by the rats and got into treatment. And you can actually, well, extrapolate that, because every infected person, when not detected, will spread the disease to a multiple of others. Um, so yeah, we're curbing TB. And in mine action as well, the results have been magnificent. We have now, like last year, we passed that some kind of milestone of more than 1 million people that have been returning to their villages to lead a life free from fear of landmines. And for me, it gives like a great sense of fulfillment to be like to be of service in this way, together with all my colleagues, because there's a few hundreds of people working in Africa, and now also in Southeast Asia, where we have like a large program in Cambodia. Now we're, after clearing Mozambique entirely of landmines, now we're entering into, well, the program is already well going on in Cambodia. Um, so yeah, it's very rewarding, um, humbling, in a sense that, well, it was written in the stars, I think, you know, that this would happen through me, and then me taking this initiative that then started to become, well, a worldwide organization that now saves lives. And yeah, so very
I,
grateful for that.
yeah, I would definitely say it was written in the stars. It totally has that flavor to it. That's beautiful work, and thank you and the teams for doing all that. That's phenomenal. Um, I'd love to talk a little bit about your path to becoming a Zen priest and what that was like, and what was there a moment where you knew that that was going to be your, like, when did that hit you?
Hmm. Yeah, when several steps there. First step was getting in touch with this practice, and that happened in a not so conventional way, but it's apparently for many people like that. I was a bit of a punk when I was a teenager. Um, I, well, I
A bit of a punk.
a punk, yes, of
Okay.
course. I was yeah, a rebel. And I think in the situation where I came from, being brought up very strict, also induced to that. Um, and I remember I was at some point in a supermarket. I was 21. I was studying, uh, and was in a supermarket, and going out of the supermarket, I was actually in a very I was already opposed to consumerism and so on, and supermarkets were for me like an exponent of consumerism, of course. Um, and between all the ads hanging there, there was one picture of a monk sitting in meditation, and it had the text "Zazen, the practice of Zen," with a telephone number. And that was in 1998. No, sorry, 1988. Yeah, and I called that number. Well, I took it, and when it was a long time before the mobile phones, I took the number, and home I called it, and there was apparently a dojo next to just a few kilometers from where my parents lived.
Interesting.
and
Okay.
and I the next morning I was sitting on a zafu in that dojo, 7 o'clock in the morning, and it felt like, for first time in a period where as an adolescent I was fighting basically with everything. I was like not in harmony at all, and it felt for the first time that, well, hey, here is something uh, that is deeper. Um, I was not at all attracted to the all the, let's say, the cultural aspects around zazen and being practiced in a traditional dojo with there's a lot of well, traditional aspects there. Um, I practiced in my sweater and my jeans, and that was okay. Also, that I found cool that there was no obligation of any kind. So I gradually started practicing more and more. And many years later, when I moved to Africa, the first year was very difficult for me. So I have to, I mean, to get the timeline, okay, right. In '95, I started with experiments at Antwerp University with these giant African pouch rats, which we imported. And in a few years, we had really good results. And then we moved the whole project to Africa to do the product development together with the end users, because it would be incredibly important for the success of the technology. We had the principles, but we didn't have a technology yet. Now, um, moving to Africa with the project, to Tanzania, that was where we have our headquarters until today. Um, for me, it was really difficult to live in a country like Tanzania. I was prone to all kinds of tropical diseases.
Hmm.
And as much I was fascinated by Africa, uh, I lost a lot of weight through malaria, I had amoeba, all kinds of typhoid, and all
Oh
kinds
my.
of diseases you don't want to have. And and I came back after a year. That first year, I stayed a full year there, and I came back very weakened. And also my practice. So I went to see my teacher, and we were sitting and talking, and I expressed that for me it was really difficult to practice alone there in such an environment. And he said, "Why don't you start a dojo there?" I said, "Well, it's really not my thing. You know, I'm not a proselytist guy at all. This is really not my thing. I'm not a Zen missionary, really." He
Hmm.
said, "Well, not for." to be a Zen missionary, but to be able to sustain yourself. Just create a structure so you can invite people or not. I mean, you can be as proactive as you want in that. So I did that, and I was surprised that at the university campus of Sokoine University in Tanzania, where I lived, that there were people interested in this practice, in this Buddhist practice of sitting quietly, observing your posture and your breathing, and and I, this became a group, and which was wonderful, and and so I was much touched by that, and there I started to become clear to me that, well, maybe the whole context of Apopo, and of course, which was also an expression of my practice in a way, in transforming critters into life saviors, and this whole transformation process, this type of innovation, that I could actually be even more of use doing this with people,
Mm.
and helping people to help themselves and transform themselves through this practice of sitting quietly in contemplation.
Mm. Well, I'm curious. That's a fascinating story and an interesting trajectory. But I'm curious too, what you may have learned about humanity, about people, um, by being or having been a Zen priest.
Um, I I've learned especially about myself, about in my Zen practice, like who I am, and I'm convinced there's still like a long way to go to learn about myself. Um,
Always more, isn't there?
there is always more.
Yeah,
Luckily enough, that it's great that there is more to learn.
yeah.
Um, and I think by through this experience, that also I can be a beacon, or a guide for other people to who want to live an authentic life, and life of self development and personal growth, um, where and that's basically what I'm doing currently. Like 5 years ago, I left Apopo's the responsibility of Apopo's executive office, and I joined the Wellbeing Project, and also started deepening my own practice. And nowadays, I do more and more of these, either personal coachings or workshops and retreats. I don't label them Zen because, well, even if of course it comes from a place of a tradition that I follow. Um, for me, the universe and the human potential is so huge that putting any label on it is reducing that potential. So I rather yeah call it without any name, practice, personal practice, personal growth practice, the path of self development, and yeah.
Mm. Beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, to hear you speak, it just has such a well. First, it has such a calming effect to hear you, relay those stories, and it seems very evident that uh, your practice and what you do just really emanates from you, and I imagine it emanates into all different areas of your life. So that's beautiful to see and experience just from being here on the other side of you, virtually, thousands of miles away. So
Isn't that amazing?
yeah, yeah,
Just that
that is
technology in itself is
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, very amazing, all of it, and that we can see each other, but like on even deeper levels, right, through this
Hmm.
too. Well, I have a few more questions for you. We love to ask people what brings you a real sense of wonder and awe. So, what brings you a real sense of wonder and awe?
What brings me a real sense of wonder and awe? Reality. Um, I can be completely caught by, for instance, a movie or a story, and that's great. I can completely enter into it and enjoy that completely. But that type of awe when the movie is finished, is in a way it's over. And what I'm most awed by is by things that are not um, well, that don't go over, things that are permanent. The life as it is, and nature as it manifests itself in this universe. And yeah, for me, I'm totally fascinated by um, the strength of life, and the way it expresses itself in this incredibly diverse world that we live in.
Mm.
And yeah, so, and that's why I'm full of awe for that. Yeah.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. How do you feel the path that you've taken, especially with rodents, has helped you expand your own human potential?
Um, well, I think my purpose is um, to serve humanity, and to serve um, something bigger than me. And I wouldn't be happy with less than uh, in terms of personal fulfillment, of personal satisfaction. I wouldn't be satisfied if I would only have attained my own little material surrounding as an accomplishment. For me, it really needed to go further than that. It is the happiness of other people that makes me happy, and therefore I feel simply compelled by um, serving the bigger good, in whatever shape that is, be it through teaching, be it through training rats, be it through working in the vegetable garden, um, and foresee food. Uh, they all go, as long as it's yeah as I, I truly think that the human potential part is really the fulfillment of that is going in a direction where we can be of service to each other, and where we can carry each other and support each other. um, yeah.
Mm. Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, 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 yes. One last question for you. What's the most interesting thing you've been learning about yourself lately?
Lately, um, I'm going to tell you a little secret. It's a bit of a vulnerable thing. I through this COVID thing, and I think, well, I for what I hear, many people struggled with this. I gained quite some weight. Um,
Okay,
yeah, because of being confined and not having the normal movement.
we can all
So
relate to that, I think.
many people have. I was told even by somebody, it's called the COVID pounds. Um, Now, it came to an extent where I wasn't really happy in my body, and I felt my movement started being limited. And so I went to see a doctor, and he advised me an anti-inflammatory diet, um, and so which exists of multiple things, and like among others, intermittent fasting, where I can eat during a time window of 8 hours, and then 16 hours I fast in every 24 hours, which is highly efficient. I'm losing weight again, but part of it is, it's really not what I wanted to say. I mean, this is the part where, okay, I got into this, and I want to work on myself, so that's what I'm doing. Part of it is also taking cold showers. And I'm not a guy for cold showers at all. I love hot showers. I love it really nicely. I feel like warm. I love warmth.
Yeah.
Apparently, cold showers increases our immune response. There's studies about that. And there is this Dutch guy. His name is Wim Hof. He
Win.
has this
Yes.
Wim Hof method. The Iceman is also called.
That's
He
right.
has a website and whole method around. So I started following that part of his method, where I take cold showers in the morning. And I have to say, and I do this now since 3 weeks. The first week, I have to admit, I really didn't look forward to the shower, but okay, I did it because it was needed. And by now, I can bear it. So what I learned from that, because that's the response to your question, is what I learned about myself is that
Hmm.
I always have space to discover new things. And whatever I have in mind about reality, that it is such, well, reality reveals that it can also be so. And that is for me like a huge wealth. So in any given situation, let's not take it for granted how we perceive reality, because reality is always a step, and there is higher, and we can always actually make a step forward in this direction.
Hmm.
I'm not sure I will ever become a total fan of, but by now it's okay. I'm standing the cold shower. It's okay.
Cold shower. Hail the cold shower. And the infinite past. That's great. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and really, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself today with us here. And it was a pleasure to connect with you and to hear your story and to hear your own personal story and to hear professionally what's been taking place and helping so many people. So thank you for what you put out in the world. It's really wonderful. For those of us who may not know, Bart is scheduled to be at Esalen and Conversations on the Edge, Who's Giving Up? Change Makers on the Front Lines, and that's September 18th through 20th. So stay in touch with us at esalen.org/learn. You can keep track of Bart on Facebook and, if I'm not mistaken, Twitter, yes, at Bart Weetjens.
I rarely do it. I rarely do it,
Really
but
tweet?
yeah, should be more active on social media. But yeah,
There's there's no shoulds.
well,
um, but is there any other place that people may be able to keep track of you other than Facebook?
well, I'll also be giving a workshop at Esalen in. I think it's if indeed the borders open, and if it will, if Esalen will be open by then. It's the week before the Conversations on the Edge. I think it's 5th to 12th, I think, or something like that. The week before the Conversation on the Edge in Esalen.
Wonderful. Yeah, and folks, stay tuned with us at esalen.org/learning. You can find out more information about that. And Bart, thank you so much for being with us today. You are a true change agent, and yeah, it's wonderful what you're putting out in the world. So very
It's my
inspiring.
pleasure, Greg. Thanks
Very
for having me.
Stay tuned with us, folks. Keep track of us on Facebook and Instagram at Esalen. And we send our hearts and thoughts out to you. Stay well and safe during this unique time in history. Know that you are not alone, and drop us a line, and we will see you very soon. Take care, folks. Until next time, I'm Greg Archer.